Hi everyone, welcome to Frederik Meijer Gardens and Sculpture Park. I'm Catherine and I'm going to narrate a tram tour for you today. My husband Mark is going to drive us around the park, but in this time we're going to give you the chance to see what you would see on the tram tour. Frederik Meijer Gardens and Sculpture Park opened in 1995. It was as a collaboration. Fred Meyer, the philanthropist, and the West Michigan Horticulture Society joined together to open our park. We have now developed 158 acres into 13 garden areas, including one off the hallway in the new building, the Padno Rooftop Sculpture Park, garden rather, one easily to see when you're inside and a must. Today we're going to spend about 45 minutes going around on our tour. We are going to go through the sculpture park, around the perimeter of the Japanese garden, to Michigan's Farm Garden by the Gwen Frostic Woodland Shade Garden, before we end up back here at the Transportation Center. One of the things that makes Meijer Gardens particularly unique in the world, we have integrated a world-class horticulture collection with a world-class modern and contemporary sculpture collection. We're about to see some of that art right now. Artists create art in order to evoke a reaction. I hope you are going to see some things with us today you really love. Others you might not care for as much, but the beauty of it is no matter what your response is, it's the right one. So for the next 45 minutes, I get to tell you, you are always right. So we're going to head on into the sculpture park now and start seeing some of our artwork. Here we go. As Mark comes up to the corner here, we're going to be turning to your right. We're going to go around one of our gardens. This is Vicky's tribute garden. It was built in honor of a longtime Meijer Garden volunteer. That some of these plants come from her actual garden or were inspired by it. And the summer burst out into wonderful colors here. On our left side is our amphitheater. We're going to be going around the back. I'm going to tell you a little more about that in connection with our construction, but I want everyone to turn their attention to the right, looking off to this side through the trees at our first sculpture. It's the American Horse by the American artist Nina Akamu. What's the first thing you notice about this horse? It's huge. It stands 24 feet tall. It's made of bronze. It's one of the largest equine or horse sculptures in the world. It's got a backstory. Go back about 500 years and Leonardo da Vinci drew up plans to make a colossal war horse for the city of Milan in Italy. It never got built. Fast forward 500 years and the American artist Nina Akamu learns of those plans, and she develops plans for her own American horse that we have here. But when we look at it, it was a war horse in Leonardo's plans, but look at this horse. The ears are still up, the nostrils are flared, a hoof is raised like it's marching. Like a horse in Milan would have said, "We're ready to go to war, stay away." But here at Meijer Gardens, we have it in a huge open plaza there. Grasses surround it in the summertime. Do you think it changes the nature or character of the horse by being in that open, friendly plaza? You can walk up under that horse. Or do you think it still looks like a war horse? That's the American Horse by the American artist Nina Akamu. I mentioned our amphitheater. It's been part of our expansion program here. We've added some space here during the summer. Last year we had 30 nationally known acts, 6 local groups coming in for concerts. There are 6 sculptures that are in our amphitheater, along with some garden areas that you are welcome to walk through and explore when you are here at the gardens. The next sculpture, it's going to be hard not to look on your right side, but I want to be sure that we get a good view at the top of the hill when Mark pulls up. You see that tall aluminum silhouette of a man up on top of the hill? That's part of Male-Female by the American artist Jonathan Borofsky. We're going to talk about that a little more in just a few minutes. But now I want you to turn your attention here to the right side to Cabin Creek by the American artist Deborah Butterfield. What do you think this is made of? I almost guarantee if you were sitting here with me right now, most of you would say wood. And remember, I promised you you'd always be right. You are right, originally it was made of wood, but it's actually made of bronze, the same material the American horse is made of. This is how she did it. She collected wood on her property, put it together and sculpted this open, airy sculpture of a horse when she was happy. She numbered every piece, took pictures, and disassembled the whole thing. Then she had each piece cast in bronze metal, put it all back together again, and applied a chemical wash or patina to make it look exactly like wood. Why do you think an artist would want a sculpture in Michigan to be made of bronze instead of wood? I'm sure most of you have figured out it would have fallen apart a long time ago. We never would have seen it. So artists choose materials for specific reasons. Here, metal that withstands the weather. The grasses around it also withstand things. Remember, integration of horticulture and sculpture. These are native prairie grasses. Their roots can grow 4 to 6 feet deep in the ground. Fire, wind, snow, weather in the prairie, they've got to be strong and hardy. Horses pulling up and eating it. The grass in your lawn, probably about 2 or 3 inches. So here's a great example how horticulture and sculpture have been put together and integrated at Cabin Creek by Deborah Butterfield. We're going to stay looking on that side of our tour. We're going to look down a somewhat narrow sight line, which is very intentional here. We're going to look at a sculpture. It's called Neuron by the American sculptor Roxy Payne. Payne is talking about connectivity here. He connected and built 3,500 stainless steel rods and pipes, primarily from the pharmaceutical and petroleum industries, and connected them all together in this 41-foot tall neuron. Neurons are those nerve cells we've all got firing from our brain and back, telling my hands to do this. Here, if it were a sunny day, the sun bounces off of that almost like an electrical charge in itself. And are you noticing we look through a narrow way into a much bigger space? This is intentional. We're in essence, a sculpture museum right now. But we make our rooms out of horticulture materials, plants, trees, so we have this big open space for Neuron that's built of trees, and once the leaves start coming out more, it'll be surrounded by green. If you ever travel and see a sculpture that has these dendrite or branching kind of stainless steel sculptors, chances are Roxy Payne, the American sculptor, is who created that sculpture. And that's Neuron by Roxy Payne. Now Mark is going to take us beyond a stand of trees that'll be on our left side when we get past the last tree, which is a tulip tree, not yet with leaves. Look back on top of that hill. This is The Other Side of Male-Female by Jonathan Borofsky. Now you know why it was so important that we look at it from the other side. If we had seen it only from the other side, it would have been a very tall silhouette of a man. If we'd only looked at it on this side, very tall silhouette of a woman. What Borofsky did is combine those two energies, male silhouette, intertwine it with the female silhouette, with the idea those two energies together are stronger than they are apart. Imagine if it was just the male silhouette or female silhouette, it wouldn't be as strong. Another important art lesson here, though, sometimes to appreciate a work of art, you've got to walk and see it from different directions. You can actually walk around this sculpture. It's part of a side path called the Groves. The tram can't go up there, but you can walk around and see all the sides. And in there are a total of 5 sculptures up there, a large irrigation pond, trees, shrubs of different varieties. Anytime you're here and there's a side path at the sculpture park, there's always going to be sculpture, always going to be horticulture to see. But this is Male Female by the American sculptor Jonathan Borofsky. It's a really wonderful season to be out here because we get glimpses of some sculptures between the trees sometimes that we don't get to see once they're all with leaves, including in the back. Some of you have seen Iron Tree by Ai Weiwei, a Chinese dissident artist who had a show here a few years ago. The next sculpture we talk about together, though, is going to be on the opposite side, on the left side. We're approaching Bronze Form by the British sculptor Sir Henry Moore. He was one of the most important contemporary sculptors of the 20th century. He was inspired by natural things, rocks, pebbles, stones, sometimes human form. What do you think you see here? Can you see any of those inspirations in this work? From the view we get, it looks really wide. If you walk around that to the side, it gets really flat or narrow. Same sculpture lesson, sometimes you need to walk around in artwork to see it. And you see the plantings that are at the base, the round, they surround it. Those are Japanese Barbary. They are a very brilliant red, meant to complement or reflect off of the sculpture, that integration of horticulture and sculpture in Bronze Form by Henry Moore. Mark is taking us to our next sculpture. I'll tell you a little bit. We try and leave out in the sculpture park things as natural as possible. We do have a full-time horticulturist and volunteers working here. Mark and I are two of the more than 1,000 volunteers who serve here at Meijer Gardens. So you're going to see the trees, the plantings, all in their natural state, and the leaves will be coming up. And you can see in right now sometimes to sculptures, and we can still see a jewel of our collection. It will be on your left side. We are going to look through a column of manicured European hornbeam trees at Eve by the French sculptor Auguste Rodin. Rodin revolutionized the world of sculpture by using gesture or body language to express emotion. Think of the story of Adam and Eve being cast out of the Garden of Eden, as if Eve's being cast out of our gallery garden right now. What do you think she might be feeling? Sadness, shame, rejection, fear? Normally, you and I would look at each other's faces to figure out what someone's feeling, but we look at this sculpture here and we don't see her face, and even if we did, there's very little detail in her face. But look at her gesture and body language. She's got her arm up in a protective way, other arm covering her torso, hunched over. You can see she's really strong, but kind of being cast out this way. That was new for sculptors. And instead of having to create exact likenesses based on facial expression, Rodin changed things up and the world of sculpture exploded. We are really fortunate here at Meijer Gardens. Not only do we have Eve, inside our Victorian parlor we have another Rodin. It's called The Kiss. It's about this tall, and whenever you see a Rodin going forward, I hope you'll think body language and gesture and see how he expressed emotion that way. That's Eve by Auguste Rodin. Now we're turning to the other side, and we're going to be looking at Espaliered Girl by a British artist, Laura Ford. If you didn't know, to espalier is how we train trees or plants. We tie them to trellises or walls to get them to grow a certain way. We look here and we've got kind of a tree trunk, but then it's human legs and little Mary Jane shoes there. What do you think's going on? Is a little girl growing into a tree growing into a little girl, maybe a little girl hiding in a tree? We don't know. Maybe Laura Ford, do you think she's talking about how we train our children? Too harshly, not harshly enough? Laura Ford doesn't fill in any of those blanks for us, but she sure starts that conversation with her title, Espaliered Girl. We're heading back to the largest waterfall that we have here at Meijer Gardens, which is running because it runs on pumps. We built this. It's becoming part of our natural landscape, but we built it not just for its exquisite beauty, but those of you who've come to Meijer Gardens know you have to turn off a very busy street east beltline. It's right behind this off to the front. It's a sound barrier too. The plantings change throughout the seasons. In the summer, there are many, many cultivars of water lilies, water lotus in there. We even have koi fish that swim in here. We can have them swim in here because they're an invasive species, but because this is run on pumps, it's not part of our local watershed. So we can keep them in here, and you'll see them. Right in front of us in the waterfall, you see we've got two special trees, kind of peeled bark, a little reddish here. These are dawn redwood trees. They've got a backstory. Up until the 1940s, they thought that this type of tree was extinct. It's native to China. They found some, they harvested the seeds, they sent them all over the world, and people grew trees. We've got two trees here that are in essence fossil trees. They are among the oldest living species of tree on planet Earth. That propagation program was so successful, these trees are no longer unique or rare. There's one at the top of the waterfall. We've got one by the Japanese garden. You may have one in your yard or on a street you may see one. But it's really cool to have these that up until the 1940s they thought no longer existed. Those are dawn redwood trees. They're a deciduous conifer, meaning that the leaves or needles fall off every year, and they get little cones and all have to be cleaned up, and they'll all come back again this year as spring progresses. The waterfall is a very popular site for weddings too. We have a lot of those here at Meijer Gardens, as you might imagine. Now as we're turning the corner, we're going to be looking over to the left side, a disc in the form of a desert rose by an Italian sculptor, Arnaldo Pomodoro. Pomodoro started off building theatrical sets, designing them, and making jewelry. Can you, when you look at this, see some of those highly polished surfaces or those diagonal architectural lines? In sculpture, diagonal lines often suggest movement or motion. A desert rose is a type of rock or crystalline formation. It forms deep in the desert. When it's eroded away, some people think that that formation looks a little bit like the head of a rose flower. Picture Pomodoro's interpretation flipping that towards us and the eruption coming towards us of his interpretation of a desert rose. There's another disc on the back side, and in between you can see the activity going on there in this sculpture. It's made of bronze, even though it's got that coppery color. It's a different patina that makes it bronze. We're going to keep our attention focused on that side of the tram to see a really special artwork. We're coming up here on your left is number 26 and number 25 by the Dutch-born artist Annika Bowman. What do you think we have going on here? Is it two men, two women, one of each? Can we tell? The one that's farthest up has a bundle holding on to it. What do you think's in it? Do you think these two figures are interacting with each other? What do you think they're feeling? Happy, glad, sad, mad? If I were to assign everyone who watches this tour to write a one-page essay of what's going on here, every one of you would write a different story. And that's what Annika Bowman wants us to do. That's why she numbers the pieces. She doesn't put her meaning on it. She wants us to engage and put our story on it in number 26 and number 25 by Annika Bowman. Now we're going to be looking to the other side of our tram, to the right side, looking at the tallest freestanding sculpture we have here at Meijer Gardens. It's called Aria by the Russian-born American artist Alexander Lieberman. An aria is a melody that's sung in one voice, so we know it's about music. Can you, looking at aria here, see any hints of music notes, clef symbols, staff lines, maybe a conductor's baton, a bar line, maybe even the end of an instrument? 42 feet tall is pretty tall here. If you've ever sung in a choir, marched in a band, been at a concert, been at an opera, what we know about the sound is it's really big. If we were to stand underneath aria, which we can on that path, we'd be surrounded by that music, just like we would if we were in a band or singing or in some environment with music. So a sculpture here is communicating the bigness of that sound. Most people assume that Alexander Lieberman loved opera, and it's true, he did. But he also loved the Rolling Stones. This is Aria by Alexander Lieberman. Now I want you all to start thinking about spiders. What comes to mind when you think of spiders? Is the first thing you think about your mother? Well, that's who Louise Bourgeois, the French artist here, was thinking about when she made Spider. Her family was in the tapestry repair business, so they were weavers. But Ms. Bourgeois said the spider stood for the thing she most admired in her mother. This is a quote. "My best friend was my mother. She was clever, patient, soothing, dainty, neat, and as useful as a spider. She could also defend herself and me." Let's look back at Spider right now. Do you see the egg sac the mama spider's holding? There are actually 12 little bronze eggs in there. You see those legs, dainty little legs, almost a protective cage, but you follow them down to the bottom and they're so thin, some have even suggested maybe they look like knitting needles, making cloth. The planting that surrounds it is a euonymus plant called purple leaf winter creeper that weaves on itself when it grows. I bet if we were out here walking and we looked at that sculpture, we'd say, oh, this woman loves spiders. But the truth is she loved her mother and was inspired to make this sculpture. Art lesson is, artists are inspired by a host of things to create art, some of which may not be obvious. And that's Spider by Louise Bourgeois. She did a series of these. You might see some as you travel through the world. Now we're coming up to an area where we're going to see 3 works of art by the same American artist, and we're going to start on the right side of the tram. Jim Dine, who's associated with the pop art movement, created here the Thunder. Remember the Venus de Milo perfectly carved smooth marble? Look at Jim Dine's take on this right now. Dark, stormy. A pop artist often takes cultural artifacts and reimagines them into something different. So the Perfect Venus, Jim Dine's take on it. Then we look to the other side as Mark pulls forward, and we're going to see in the foreground, background there is Large Parrot Screams Color, Birds and Hearts, a recurring theme in Jim Dine's work. And to the back side of this area, we have tools in their places. He also put hardware tools in, sometimes real, sometimes made of bronzes here. If we were walking from Spider now and looking at this, we are likely to think 3 different artists created these artworks. But the reality is, same artist, very different expression. The horticulture is involved here too. In front of the Thunder, we saw a Russian or Siberian cypress. By Tools in Their Places is a mugo pine, and it's a single seed juniper in front of Large Parrot Screams Color. They're all evergreen plants, but very different looking. So same family evergreen, different plants, same artist Jim Dine, 3 different works of art. We're going to get a good glimpse again on the left side of the tram, looking down a pathway at 2 indeterminate lines by a French sculptor, Bernard Vinay. A remarkable thing about Vinay is he did not sketch this ahead of time, to know what he was going to do. He works with these giant pieces of steel and caused them to be coiled together, kind of these fun two different lines to see where the steel took him here. Can you see where one of them begins and one of them ends, or where the two are when you look at it? And think about the amount of work it had to take him to get that steel to coil that much in two indeterminate lines. We're going to keep our attention focused on that side of the tram. I want you to keep your eyes out looking for a big yellow sculpture. The sculpture's name is Julia. It's by an American artist, Keith Haring. Some of you maybe are old enough to remember back in the 70s, there were artists drawing graffiti in subway stations in New York. Keith Haring was one of those and described his work as trying to create a bit of goofy cheerfulness. Here we look at this Julia, thinking a woman, but it's an abstract piece. It's really reduced to a minimum of lines. There's no face, no fingers, no toes, no clothing. But what can you see is going on here? What do you think Julia's doing? Some of you might think dancing. Some of you might think throwing a softball, hula hooping, maybe even yoga. Typically, when people tell me what they think about this piece, they're very happy ideas or fun ideas. Do you think that yellow color has something to do with those choices? In Julia, with the yellow color, we talked about it being a happy color. What if Keith Haring had painted that black or hunter green or even pink? Do you think our responses of what we think Julia is doing would have been different? And do you think Keith Haring was successful in creating a bit of goofy cheerfulness here in Julia? We've got another sculpture that's directly across on the right side of the tram, different artist. It's by Elizabeth Frank. She was a British sculptor. She was a figurative artist, studied figures. Here, perhaps some suggestions of bird forms, but she did it in a surrealistic way, almost dreamlike. When the plantings in front of this are here, they kind of blow in the wind. Remarkably, if you go around the side of this, they're really, really thin. This is called Mirage 1 and Mirage 2. What do we think of when we see a mirage? It's usually something in the atmosphere that creates something that looks maybe like water or ripples. If you follow the legs of the figure that's on the right down to the base, there are actually ripples in the bronze, like water. So we've got a surrealistic piece here and suggesting maybe some water. When you walk around, how thin it is, with it almost disappearing, leaves us with the question, is this real or is it a mirage? In Mirage 1 and Mirage 2 by Elizabeth Frank. We're going to keep our attention on this side of the tram. We have a ground level sculpture coming up. It's called Listening to History by the British artist Bill Woodrow. Some of you may have been here a couple years ago to hear him speak. This piece at ground level, we've got a disembodied head with a book tied to it, with the cording over its eyes. What do you think's going on here? Do you think it's someone who's listening to history, who fell asleep listening to history, who's being forced to listen to history? Or is it someone who's enduring the consequences of not listening to history? During the time when Bill Woodrow was here, people asked him, of course, what did you mean by this? And like most artists would say, whatever you think it means. There's an old adage many of you may have heard of, those who fail to listen to history are doomed to repeat it. Do you think that's what's going on here in listening to history? We have another work coming up again on the right side of the tram. This is King and Queen by the British artist Sir David Nash. David Nash is an environmental sculptor, meaning he doesn't pick the trees that are surrounding us here, say, cut them down, we're going to make a great sculpture out of that. He looks for trees that are down or scheduled to come down. These were 2 oak trees. He took chainsaws and axes and sculpted it. When he was happy, he took torches and blackened it. That actually helps preserve wood. Eventually they cast it in bronze. Can you see some of those markings, rough markings of the axes or the chainsaws? We have two pieces here with a title of King and Queen. Which one do you think is the king, and which one do you think is the queen? You're right. Remember, I promised you. He had an interest in ancient folklore, too. So maybe you saw some hints of that in those pieces. Over the hill on the same side of the tram, we get a great view of Scarlotti by the American sculptor Mark de Suvero. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes, but the hill that goes there is part of our wildflower meadow. Last spring, we burned that to the ground to get rid of the thatch, kill the weeds, release some nutrients. The flowers came back that they were taller than I was in some of that, and it's just been mowed, and we are looking forward to those flowers coming back again this year. But first, we've come up on another sculpture we have. This one is called Großer Treffry by the German artist Dietrich Klinge. The title does not translate. Mr. Klinge has told us that, so we don't get a clue from this. But look at it. It was originally made of wood. Woods are very important in German culture. It's kind of blocky, but still you can see axe marks, maybe chainsaw marks like we had at King and Queen. Sitting up tall, no fingers, but even the neck extended, the chin up. Woodland spirits are part of German folklore. I think this might be a woodland spirit that's just emerged from the woods behind, or is it guarding the woods that are behind it? It's got this little niche all to itself. The plants that are planted around the base are an American wintergreen. They live year-round. That they're a little reddish now. You can maybe see some of the green, then they get white flowers, get red berries, kind of like maybe the carpet on a forest floor here at Großer Treffry. We have another Klinge work out in the Woodland Shade Garden. We've had a long-standing relationship here at Meijer Gardens with Mr. Klinge. The next sculpture we see is not made of bronze like the ones we've been looking at. It's made of stainless steel and stone. This is I, You, She, or He by the Spanish artist Jaume Plensa. What do you think we've come up on here? There are three figures. Their faces where they would be are open. The one that's closest to the tram, the ear, where the ears would be are open. There are all these letters. We don't recognize the words. Is it maybe a skin? See how they flow to the stone? Or maybe even a tattoo of the letters on individuals. Plensa works all over the world, so he has to communicate in a number of different languages. And so he has talked about it perhaps as being a tattoo, and I've got a quote from Mr. Plensa here. He suggests the power of language, both verbal and nonverbal, influences human conditions. He says, life is permanently tattooing our bodies with transparent ink, and it produces a kind of hidden message in our bodies that some can read and some not. His title challenges us here. You've seen figures here, but the title is I, You, She, or He. That's 4. What or who do you think is missing here? Could it be you joining the center of the circle to complete the conversation? We have commissioned a new work by Mr. Plensa that is going to fill our new Welcome Center, which will welcome the more than 750,000 of you that visit. It'll be when the Welcome Center opens early next year, we'll see it. We've got a view that will be on your right side, another view of Scarlotti by Mark de Suvero. He's an American sculptor. If that looks like construction material, salvaged steel, it is. That's what he does. He salvages them. This is a non-objective or non-representational work, meaning it's not meant to look like something in particular. Do you see the diagonal lines here again with the steel crisscrossing? That bar in the front, if the wind catches it in just the right way, moves. It's a kinetic piece that's in there. Suvero says he was inspired by Scarlotti, the Italian composer, but again, it's not meant to look like Scarlotti. But can you see the suggestions or hints to you, maybe, of something that involves music or a composer? Or what do you find that you like in this piece of Scarlotti by Mark de Suvero? It will be surrounded by those wildflowers. It sits smack in the middle of it. A wonderful sight, and looks different throughout the year as the plantings change, as do most things here at Meijer Gardens. We are really lucky. This is a 4-season place to be. Mark is bringing us now up to Column of the Free Spirit by the African-American artist Richard Hunt. He studied a lot of traditions, and let's look here, maybe put some together. We follow up that formal column from the base up to the top. You might expect a formal bust of Julius Caesar, like would be an ancient or even European tradition. Instead, what Richard Hunt does is it bursts into flames or wings, arms, smoke, something much freer and more expressive. Do you think maybe that's representational or looking like more of the freedom of the American spirit, contrasted perhaps with some of the more formal traditions of more ancient times? That's Column of the Free Spirit by Richard Hunt. We're going to be looking at the last sculpture we see in the sculpture park proper. It'll be on the right-hand side of our tram, up on top of the hill. It's the Grand Rapids Arch by Andy Goldsworthy. Remarkably, nothing is holding this together. What Goldsworthy did is he brought over sandstone, quarried in Scotland. They built it against a scaffolding, the pieces. At the top, they put in a keystone. When they pull away the scaffolding, it stands on its own weight, perfectly safe. Goldsworthy chose this spot, and he chose not to have that arch go across the path, because most every one of us would just walk right under it as if it's part of the architecture. Instead, he wanted it going along the path, kind of like it's walking along with us, and he sometimes calls works like this walking arches, here in the Grand Rapids Arch by Andy Goldsworthy. That is the last sculpture in the sculpture park proper. We are headed over to the Richard and Helen Devos Japanese Garden, which opened in 2015. If you didn't know, a Japanese garden is a work of art in itself. Huichi Kurisu was our artist. He's based out of Portland. What makes Meijer Gardens Japanese Garden extremely unique is we have incorporated 7 works of contemporary sculpture into our Japanese garden. And we're looking at the first one here on the right side of the tram. This is Saber, Larch Hill by David Nash, same man who made King and Queen. What Nash did here is he caused 50 American larch trees to be planted at very specific angles, worked closely with our horticulture staff. When he's satisfied with the growth, Nash shall authorize pulling the stakes. But can you see in some of these trees how they're already curving up? That they're angled, they curve up kind of like sabers or swords. This is a living sculpture, that the life, the health, the death, all of it is part of the artwork. Nash built this on faith because he's not going to live long enough to see it fully mature. Neither will I. But when it does, this sculpture will be visible inside the Japanese garden on the other side of this hill. So it's really cool to see the development of Saber Larch Hill. You're probably going to be noticing a lot of boulders on the perimeter as we go around the Japanese garden. They're the backbone of our garden, symbolic of strength, stability. We got about 4,000 of them. All but one come from Western Michigan. We don't have pink granite in Western Michigan, and it's used for a sculpture. It came from Wisconsin. Here's the west gate of the Japanese garden. Shows some of the traditional materials that might be used. You can see bamboo in the fencing, teak for the gates. We used both modern and traditional techniques here. Kurisu designed the buildings and had them constructed partially in Japan, disassembled them, brought them here along with traditional Japanese craftsmen who worked alongside craftsmen here to construct them on site. So it's a combination of the two. A Japanese garden is meant to enter a really special space, a quiet space. Be mindful, you're crossing over a threshold. We get peeks in today, but Kurisu designed and either planted or saved trees to become the walls of the Japanese garden to keep that special space preserved inside. He said he was looking at 50 years in the future. So there's some plants that are low, some in the middle, some high. Very soon we will even be able to see what we're seeing now. You can see the Zigzag Bridge in here, but these trees will all fill it in as they're intended to do. The Zigzag Bridge is intentionally not straight. We'd walk over it, boom, to the other side. Instead, Kurisu wants us to pause and even has little nooks in the bridge to stop, because every place you look, you get a different view of our 8-acre Japanese garden. It's a walking path that goes around the garden. It's about a mile to walk around it, but you can walk into it as far as you want or not. We're going to be seeing through a spot marks taking us that we can see inside a little more clearly. One of the structures that we have in our Japanese garden is a Japanese tea house. We hold formal Japanese tea ceremonies one Saturday a month, May through October. You can go online at meiergardens.org to check out tickets for those events. We also open the Japanese tea house on the third Sunday of the month, May through October, so you can go in and see what it looks like. It's the building straight across here, and immediately to the right of that, the highest points where you can see trees and kind of a reddish bush is our viewing hill. Highest point in the Japanese garden. There's a gently sloping spiral path, paved, gets you to the top. When you're at the top and you look forward, you can see almost the entire 8 acres of the garden. There are 4 waterfalls in there. There are islands in there. There's a bridge that goes over to the gazebo. There's natural wildlife in there. You're likely to see a great blue heron. You'll see a lot of fish in the pond, but not koi. This is part of the natural watershed that, should there be a flood, it would get into the Grand River and end up in Lake Michigan, and we can't do that and have invasive fish go there. But keep your eyes peeled. The bridge, the tea house, the plantings. Some of the trees you might notice are growing at angles. That's how trees grow in nature. Kurisu did that intentionally so that it would look like that. And like I said, there are works of sculpture. You might get a glimpse down there at Long Island Buddha, the head that's in there. That this is a time, it's one of my favorite times to be in the tram. If you get to, in a cold day, go around, you get to see in the garden. If we had a drone or we were flying over the water that's in there that was dredged, it was dredged roughly in the shape of the Japanese character for heart. Now we're on the speedway of our tram trip, and if you were riding with us, you would know it's not very fast. Behind the trees and going around, we've got wetlands you don't see from here, but we've got a boardwalk that goes out there that's accessible from the farm garden or by the Woodland shade garden. Lots of wildlife out there to see. But we are headed now to Michigan's farm garden, which is meant to represent what a farm would have looked like in Michigan in the 1930s, Depression era. Everyone worked, including kids. You're first going to see some of the sculpture at ground level. You see the pine stumps. It's actually a sculpture called Pine Stumps by Tom Hillis. They would have used that for fencing instead of wasting wood. There's a produce stand. You would sell any extra food you had, anything to be able to make money. Do you notice the big giant barn in the background? It's real. It's over 100 years old. Was on a local Michigan farm. They disassembled it, brought it here, reassembled it, Inside there are tools, farm tools from what would have been used in the 30s. You can go inside and guess what they were used for. Behind the wooden fence in the middle is our heirloom vegetable garden, and you might see a little girl's head peeking up. It's a girl riding a pig. Sculpture in this garden is very realistic because it's a realistic garden. We harvest some of the vegetables that we grow. Some end up in our cafe. The house that you see is meant to be a replica of the house that Lena Meijer grew up in. The bottom floor is a kitchen. We open it up for special events that are in there. Rocking chairs always around on the porch. Plantings change throughout the season with annuals and perennials that are here. You might catch a glimpse of the sculpture, a little girl watering her garden. Behind the house, there's a windmill. It's real. It was on the farm that Lena Meijer grew up on. There's a red water pump at the base. It pumps water. You can do that, in fact. We have in the background, there's a sculpture of Mac the draft horse. The arbor that's there grows hops that grow in the summer. You might notice the outhouse. That's for demonstration purposes only. We have working restrooms in the building. There's even a replica beehive here because they would have had bees for pollination and to use the honey. We don't have bees in our beehive here. And these are fruit and nut trees that when they have crops, we pick the fruit and the nuts and we use them. A very realistic garden showing what a farm would have looked like back in the Depression era. Michigan's farm garden. The path that continues on the left side of the tram that goes in there leads to the Gwen Frostic Woodland Shade Garden. Gwen Frostic was a very well-known Michigan artist who was fascinated by what occurred and what went on in nature under the canopy of the trees. So in the summertime, when the trees all have their leaves on it, there are plantings that grow here. And I tell people, if you have places where the sun doesn't shine and you want plants, this is the place to go for inspiration. And on a summer day, it's the place to go outside in the gardens because it's substantially cooler in there. On the opposite side of the tram, we're still coming around the Japanese garden, and we actually see back in it. Our two largest waterfalls are on the end, and Kurisu designed this so the waterfalls go under a footbridge that we cross as part of our path, almost to incorporate us into the gardens. You might also see there are 4 squares floating in the water there. That's a sculpture by the American artist George Rickey. And with the way the water moving or the wind moving, those squares are moving too. It's a kinetic sculpture that floats in the pond in the Japanese garden. You can see what the pathway looks like that goes around to the Japanese garden that you'd walk around. Mark is taking us up towards the main gate of the Japanese garden, which again will have traditional as well as contemporary materials. But when you look through the gates, you're going to see a tall black granite column with 3 concentric circles in it. It's a sculpture, Untitled, by the Indian-born British sculptor Anish Kapoor. When you come back to visit us, stand right in front of that when you go in the Japanese garden. The way it reflects incorporates you into the garden and the garden into your surroundings. The front of the garden here, you may see some trees that are pruned to look a lot older than they might be. It's a technique called niwaki, similar to what you might think bonsai is, except the roots are in the ground of these plants. They were the first trees we planted here. There's a wash basin that's covered up right now for the winter with the water, but some people would wash their hands or their faces, preparing them to cross that intentional threshold to go into the Japanese garden, because again, it's a special place. There's a Zen-style rock garden in there. In warmer weather, the Bonsai Collection comes out to the bonsai garden. And if you come out to visit and you want not to do the full mile around, if you bear to the left, it takes you to where the viewing hill is. So you get the biggest bang for your buck walking through there. The pathway that continues outside the main gate is still part of the Japanese garden. In the secondary pond, there's a peninsula that goes out that's our cherry tree promenade. Remember I told you the boulders are the permanent stability backbone of the garden. Cherry trees quite the opposite. They symbolize impermanence. The leaves come, the flowers bloom, they fade, they die, the leaves go away, and then they're reborn. The impermanence or cycle of life. That's what it symbolizes there. And it's weather dependent. You can keep checking the website for when the peak blooms come in any given year because it changes. You'll get one last view on your right side of the Grand Rapids Arch, and we're alongside the Lena Meijer Children's Garden. I call it 5 acres of fun. You don't have to be a kid. In there's a tree house, a log cabin, an archaeology pit, all sorts of fun things. But it also means when we make this turn that sadly our time together is quickly coming to a close. Mark and I want to first and foremost thank you for taking the time to check out what a tram tour is, and particularly what it looks like in the winter. I hope you learned a thing or two about the gardens that you didn't know before. I hope it will entice you to come back as often as you can. Maybe even take a tram tour when you're here. There's always something going on when we're open. Classes, we've got a great cafe, a gift shop, camp, special art exhibits. When the gardens reopen, there'll be a special art exhibit, George Siegel, that we will be able to see. But thank you for taking the time to watch us, and I hope that I get to see you in person really soon.